Elderly man saves drowning K, 9 German Shepherd puppy. But what the mother did next was heartbreaking. The river was calm, the morning air thick with mist, and Walter, an 82-year-old retired farmer, was on his usual walk by the water's edge, just like he had done every day since his wife passed. But that morning would be different. Fate had something else in store. From the stillness came a high-pitched cry, faint and desperate, then another. Walter turned toward the sound, his heart racing faster than it had in years. There, barely visible in the murky water, was a small creature fighting for life, a puppy, a German Shepherd puppy. Without a second thought, Walter dropped his cane and charged forward, plunging into the icy river, driven only by instinct. The current was strong, but he was stronger. When he emerged, soaking wet and gasping for air, the tiny pup lay trembling in his arms, alive but barely. Just as Walter reached the riverbank, something stirred in the bushes. A second set of eyes watching. The puppy's mother. What she did next was something no one saw coming. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring you more emotional and inspiring stories like this one. What happens between an old man, a helpless puppy, and a heartbroken mother will stay with you long after the story ends. Walter's boot sank slightly into the dew-covered soil as he walked slowly along the edge of the river. It was early, just past 6, and the air still held the damp chill of dawn. Birds chirped lazily overhead, and the tall grass bent under his careful steps. At 82, he wasn't as quick as he used to be, but he still made the walk every morning, rain or shine. It was the last thing he had left of his old life, the one he'd shared with his wife, Margaret, before cancer took her 5 years ago. He paused at the dock, leaned on his cane, and let out a long, peaceful breath. This was a quiet he lived for. No noise, no pain, just the sound of the wind moving across the water. Then he heard it, a sharp yelp, quick and high-pitched, then another. Walter squinted toward the sound. His heart began to pound. It was coming from the riverbank, somewhere near the bend where the trees dipped lower. It didn't sound like a bird or a fox. It sounded like a cry for help. Walter followed the sound, moving faster than he had in years. His cane was forgotten as adrenaline surged through his frail body. When he reached the clearing, he gasped. There, caught in the current, was a small dark shape splashing wildly in the water. It was a puppy, no more than a few weeks old. Its tiny paws clawing at the surface, head bobbing just above the rushing stream. Walter didn't hesitate. He dropped his jacket and stepped straight into the river. The water was bone-chilling, stealing his breath as it wrapped around his legs and waist. His knees buckled, but he pressed forward, pushing through the current, one staggering step at a time. The puppy let out one last weak yelp before disappearing beneath the surface. No, 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 Walter muttered through clenched teeth, thrusting himself forward. His hand reached into the water blindly, his heart pounding, and by some miracle he felt fur. He grabbed the limp body and pulled it against his chest, turning back toward the shore, muscles screaming with the effort. When he finally stumbled out of the river and collapsed onto grass, he was soaked, shivering and breathless, but the pup was still in his arms. It wasn't moving. Come on, little one," Walter whispered, laying the pup down and pressing on its small chest gently. He'd seen it done in movies years ago. He had no idea what he was doing, only that he had to do something. Then the puppy coughed, a weak, pitiful sputter, but it was enough to make Walter cry out in relief. Water spilled from its mouth, and then slowly, the tiny chest began to rise and fall on its own. "You're okay now," he whispered, brushing a trembling hand over the wet fur. "You're safe." But then a sound behind him made him freeze, a deep, guttural growl. Walter turned his head slowly and saw her. The mother, a full-grown German Shepherd, stood at the edge of the trees, eyes locked onto her pup. Her ribs were visible, her fur dirty and matted. Her body trembled, not from weakness, but from something deeper, grief, fear, rage. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Walter didn't move. He held the pup tighter, unsure what she'd do. She could attack. She could run. Instead, she let out a sound that shattered him. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was a whine, soft, low, wounded. She stepped forward slowly, ears down, her whole body shaking. And just as Walter held out the pup toward her, she sat right there at the river's edge, her eyes never leaving his. Then she turned her head away as if she couldn't bear to look at her baby anymore, as if she had already given up. Walter sat in the grass, wet and stunned, holding the breathing pup in his arms while the mother, the canine who clearly once served and protected, laid down in the mud and let out the saddest sound he had ever heard. What had she seen? What had she lost? He didn't know yet, but something in her silence told him this story was far from over. Walter wrapped the puppy in his flannel shirt, cradling the tiny body against his chest. The pup was still weak, shivering but alive. Barely. He looked down at the mother again, still lying in the mud near the edge of the trees. Her head turned slightly away, but her eyes hadn't left him. She wasn't snarling. She wasn't panicking. She was defeated. Walter had seen that look before, in the mirror, months after Margaret passed, when getting out of bed felt like a punishment, when the house felt too big, too quiet, when hope had vanished, and all that remained was routine. This dog had that same look, like something inside her had broken long before Walter arrived. "I'm not going to hurt him," Walter said softly, unsure why he was even speaking aloud. "I promise you that." The mother didn't move. Her breathing was shallow, her fur once thick and proud, now patchy and dull, covered in brambles and dry blood. Her paws were raw, one of her hind legs trembling uncontrollably. She wasn't just starving, she was injured. Walter slowly rose to his feet, the puppy still in his arms. "Come on, girl," he said gently, taking a step toward her. "Let me help you too." She didn't growl, but she also didn't move. Her eyes followed him, flicking to the pup in his arms, then back to his face. It was almost like she was trying to decide if he was real or just another cruel trick from the world. Walter glanced back toward the path, then down at the pup. It needed warmth, food, a dry place to rest. And so did she. But he couldn't carry them both. And he knew deep in his chest if he walked away now, she might be gone by the time he came back. So he made a choice. Walter crouched slowly and placed the puppy gently into the grass, a few feet from the mother. The pup let out a tiny sound, a whimper, maybe even a call. The mother lifted her head, her ears perked slightly, and then painfully, she dragged herself forward on her elbows. Each step was slow, trembling, but she made it. She curled herself around the puppy, tucking it against her body, shielding it the best she could. Walter's eyes stung. He didn't want to leave them, but he needed help, food, supplies, a warm towel, anything to keep them both alive through the night. "I'll be back," he whispered. "Please hold on." He turned and hurried back to his cabin as fast as his aging legs would carry him. It was less than a mile, but it felt like 20 by the time he reached the porch. He was out of breath, heart racing. He grabbed a thick blanket, a can of beef stew, and a package of sliced turkey from the fridge. It was all he had, but it would have to do. Then he rummaged through the closet for an old dog bowl, dusty and unused since his Labrador passed years ago. He rushed back, praying they were still there. And they were. But something had changed. The mother was now standing, just barely over the pup. Her head was low, her body swaying. She looked ready to collapse again at any second, but her eyes were alert now, focused, watching. She had waited. Walter approached slowly and set down the bowl. He opened the stew and poured inside, mixing in strips of the turkey. The smell wafted through the air, thick and savory. At first, the mother didn't move, but the pup stirred, sniffing. Then finally, the mother took one limping step forward, then another, and began to eat slowly, carefully, as if it was the first food she trusted in weeks. Walter sat in the grass, a few feet away, quietly watching. His heart swelled. He didn't know what this dog had been through, where she came from, or what failed her. But he knew one thing. She was fighting to stay alive for that pup. And something inside her had shifted, but just as Walter allowed himself to breathe, he noticed something behind the trees. A glint of light, movement, then a sound, the unmistakable click of a camera shutter. Someone was watching them. Walter spun around, heart racing. The rustling behind the trees stopped. Whoever had been watching them had already vanished. "Hello," he called, his voice louder than he intended. Is someone there? Nothing. Only the wind moving the branches. No answer, no movement. Just that eerie silence that didn't feel natural anymore. He looked down at the mother and her puppy. The bowl was empty. The mother now lay beside the pup, her eyes half closed, exhausted but more alert than before. Still, she flinched at the sound of his voice. Her body, even in rest, was always bracing for danger. Walter crouched beside them and spoke low, mostly to himself. I don't know who's out there, girl, but I'm not leaving you here. He wrapped the puppy in the blanket and then reached toward the mother. She tensed, her eyes opening wide. It's okay, Walter said, his hand hovering near her chest. I'm not going to hurt you. To his surprise, she didn't bite. She did not growl. She just stared at him, panting. Her body was covered in old wounds, some healed poorly, others fresh. A large scar traced her ribs, and her left ear was torn. This wasn't a stray. This was a survivor. Walter couldn't lift her. She was too big and too injured to be dragged. But he had an idea. I'll be right back, he whispered. He jogged back to his cabin and pulled an old wagon from the shed. Rusty, squeaky, but it would work. He laid an old mattress across it and threw more blankets on top. When he returned, she was still there, still watching, still waiting. Carefully, gently, he placed the puppy in a wagon and motioned to the mother. I can't do this without you, girl. After a long moment, she rose, trembling but determined. She climbed in. Walter nearly cried at the sight of it. This broken dog, this ghost of what she once was, trusted him just enough to lie beside her pup and let him pull them toward safety. He brought them into the cabin and made a soft bed by the fireplace. The room filled with warmth, and for the first time in who knows how long, the mother slept. Hours passed. Walter watched them from the kitchen table, sipping tea. His mind raced. He didn't know if she would make it through the night. He didn't even know her name. But then something strange happened. He noticed the tattoo. It was faint, barely visible through the dirty fur on her ear, but he knew what it was. He'd seen it before, back when his cousin served as a police officer. It was a K9 ID number. Walter's heart skipped. This wasn't just a stray. She was a former K9 unit, which meant she once had a handler, a job, a mission, a bond, and someone had abandoned her. He got up gently, took a photo of the tattoo, and pulled out his old laptop. It took a while. The Wi-Fi was weak, and the keys were sticky, but after some digging, he found something that stopped him cold. K9 Unit 914X. Name, Shadow. Assigned to Officer David Renner. Status, retired due to injury. Transferred to civilian home. Last recorded location, upstate New York. Walter leaned back in his chair, stunned. What had happened? Why was a retired K, 900 of miles from her last known home, half-starved and near death? He looked back at the fireplace. Shadow shifted in her sleep, pressing closer to the puppy, whose breathing was steady. Then he heard it again, click, a camera. This time, it was closer, right outside his window. Walter rushed to the front door and flung it open. He caught a glimpse of someone disappearing into the woods. Dark jacket, hood pulled low, but they dropped something on the ground as they ran, a laminated ID badge. He picked it up. It read, Property of Blackett Security Contractors. And on the back, handwritten in faded ink, Unit 914X, do not engage, asset is compromised. Walter's hands shook. They weren't just being watched. Someone was trying to take her back. Walter locked every door and window that night. The ID badge sat on his kitchen table like a silent threat. Blackett Security Contractors. He had never heard of them, but the phrase, do not engage, asset is compromised, ran in circles in his mind. It sounded military, secretive, dangerous, and it confirmed what his gut had already told him. Shadow wasn't just abandoned. She was discarded by people who had once used her. He turned off the lights and stood by the fireplace, watching the flames dance across Shadow's fur. She was still sleeping, her head resting over her puppy's back, but the tension in her body never fully faded. Even in sleep, she stayed alert. Walter sighed and sat beside them on the floor, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. His knees popped and his body ached from the cold river water earlier that day, but he didn't move. Not while they were in his home. Not while someone out there might be watching. He stayed awake for hours, his shotgun resting nearby, dusty but loaded. The cabin, once a quiet retreat, now felt like a war zone. Every creak made his heart race. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. At some point near dawn, he drifted off, just for a moment, and that's when it happened. A loud crack at the door. He jolted awake, grabbed a shotgun, and stumbled toward the entrance. Another knock, louder this time, then silence. He glanced out the window. A black SUV sat parked by the edge of his property. He flung the door open, heart pounding. A tall man in a sleek coat stood on the porch. He wore gloves, sunglasses, and a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, sir," the man said smoothly. "I hope I didn't wake you." Walter raised the shotgun slightly. "You did. Who are you?" The man didn't flinch. "I'm with Black Ridge. You may have found one of our assets." "She's not an asset," Walter snapped. "She's a dog, and she's injured." The man's smile widened just enough to make Walter's skin crawl. "Sir, I understand your concern, but K944X belongs to us. She's a liability out in the wild. We're here to retrieve her safely." "She's not going anywhere," Walter growled. "She has a puppy. They nearly drowned in that river. She needs care, not to be dragged off in the back of a van." The man's smile finally vanished. "Sir, with all due respect, you're not authorized to house a military-grade service animal. I didn't ask your authorization." A tense silence settled between them. The wind howled through the trees. "We can do this the easy way," the man said, his voice flat. "Or the legal way." Walter took a step forward. "Or you can get off my land before I decide this is my way." The man exhaled and adjusted his gloves. "I'll return tomorrow with papers." Walter didn't lower the gun. The man stepped off the porch, turned slowly, and walked back to the SUV. The tires crunched on the gravel as the vehicle reversed down the long dirt road and disappeared into the trees. Walter slammed the door shut and leaned against it, his breath shaking. He knew then they weren't just going to walk away, and if they couldn't take Shadow through intimidation, they'd come for her in the dark later. That day, Shadow woke up. Her eyes met Walter's, and something passed between them. A flicker of trust, of understanding. "I think someone's coming for you, girl," he whispered. "But they'll have to go through me first." He gently touched her scarred head. She didn't pull away. Over the next few hours, he got to work reinforcing the door, setting up motion lights outside, and calling an old friend from town, a retired sheriff, just in case. And for the first time, Shadow followed him through the house. Still limping, still weak, but she stayed close. That night, after the puppy drifted to sleep by the fire, Shadow curled at Walter's feet and didn't move. But neither did he, because both of them knew the real fight hadn't even started yet. The storm rolled in just after sunset. Thunder cracked in the distance, echoing across the woods like a warning shot. Walter stood on the porch, scanning the trees. The security lights blinked every so often, triggered by wind or wildlife, but his fingers still hovered near the trigger of the old shotgun. Inside, Shadow paced in circles, her limp more pronounced as the rain began to fall. Her ears twitched at every sound. She stayed near the pup, but her eyes never stopped scanning the walls, the door, the windows. She knew something was coming. Walter hadn't slept in 2 nights, but he didn't feel tired. Not now. Not with that man's voice still replaying in his head. She's a liability, an asset. He hated the way they talked about her, like she was broken equipment. Not a mother, not a survivor, not a soul. That night, the power went out. Lightning flashed across the windows, followed by the hum of silence as the lights cut. Walter grabbed a flashlight and made his way to the fireplace, where the heat was still steady. The old cabin had lived through many storms, but this one felt different. This one felt watched. He sat beside Shadow and the pup, listening to the wind beat against the glass. Shadow's ears twitched again. Her body went stiff. A second later, Walter heard it too. A vehicle, no headlights, moving slow through the woods behind the cabin. He stood, flashlight in hand, and moved toward the back window. Through the slits in the blinds, he saw the unmistakable outline of the black SUV. Same one from before. Only now, there were two men, both in dark coats, both carrying something. Not weapons. A crate. Walter's stomach turned. They weren't just planning to intimidate him this time. They were here to take her. He rushed to the front of the house and grabbed the collar and leash he used to keep for his old lab, Shadow. She watched him with alert eyes. "I need you to trust me," Walter whispered, clipping the collar gently around her neck. "I'm not letting them take you." She didn't resist. She stood, shaky but tall, and nudged the pup with her nose until the tiny body stirred. "We're leaving." He pulled open the cellar door and led them into the earth beneath the cabin, dark, cold, but dry. There was an old storm shelter under there, once used for tornadoes, stocked with canned food and blankets. He placed the pup in a box filled with rags and helped Shadow down onto a sleeping bag. Then he turned off the flashlight. The only sound was their breathing and the thunder above. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Then he heard boots on the porch. A voice muffled through the floorboards. "He's not answering. Break the lock." The sound of splintering would made Shadow flinch. And then, something unexpected. A bark, not from Shadow, but from outside. Then another, louder. Then a voice shouting, "Get off my property." Walter's eyes went wide. He recognized that voice. Sheriff Lewis. Moments later, a gun cocked. Footsteps scrambled. Doors slammed and silence returned. Walter slowly crept back up the cellar steps and peeked out to the crack in the broken door. Sheriff Lewis stood in the rain, his shotgun raised. The SUVs were gone. "I saw your lights go out," the sheriff said, not turning. "Figured I'd swing by." Walter opened the door fully. "They were here. I figured." The next morning, with the storm past and the sunlight breaking through the clouds, Sheriff Lewis sat at the kitchen table, flipping to the Blackage ID badge Walter had saved. "This group's been under the radar for years," the sheriff muttered. "Private contractor stuff. Gray areas. No government oversight. They train dogs for things we're not supposed to talk about." Walter frowned. "Like what? Combat, riot control, border sweeps, black ops? And when they're done with the bags, they discard them," Lewis said quietly. "Just like her." Walter's hand tightened around the cup of coffee. "I want to show you something," Lewis added, pulling out a photo from his pocket. Walter looked and froze. The picture was of Shadow, younger, healthier, wearing a tactical harness, standing beside a man, Officer David Renner. "That's her handler," Lewis said. "But here's the twist." He pulled out a second photo, the same man, only this time was a news clipping. "Former Blackage officer found dead in apparent suicide. Family alleges cover-up." Walter looked at Shadow, and everything clicked. She hadn't run away. She had been running for her life. For the first time in weeks, Walter left the cabin door open, not because he felt entirely safe, but because something in the air had changed. The clouds had cleared. The wind was warm. And Shadow was no longer pacing. She now sat at the edge of the porch with her pup curled against her leg, staring into the trees, not watching in fear, but in calm awareness, as if she'd finally given herself permission to breathe. Sheriff Lewis had stayed the night, parked just down the road, keeping watch. They both knew Blackridge might come back, but now they were ready, not just with shotguns and locks, but with truth. Shadow hadn't been lost. She'd been hunted. And for the first time, Walter could see it in her eyes. She knew she was no longer alone. Walter stepped outside with two bowls, one filled with cooked chicken and rice, the other with cool water. Shadow didn't hesitate. Now she let him place the food down, just inches from her. Her gaze was gentle, trusting. When he reached out to scratch behind her ear, she leaned into it. "I knew you were more than a fighter," he said softly. "You're a mother, a soldier, and you've seen too much." Shadow ate slowly. The puppy, still too small to chew, sniffed and squeaked, and eventually curled up again in Walter's flannel shirt on the porch swing. Walter sat beside them with a heavy sigh. "I lost my boy to the army, you know," he said quietly. "Josh, that's his name, was his name." Shadow looked up. He went overseas. Never came back. I never asked what he really did over there. Never knew how deep he was in. I just, I thought I had more time to ask. The old man's voice cracked. He loved dogs, especially German shepherds. You remind me of the one he raised when he was 12. Her name was Sally. She was the last thing he wrote about in his journal. Said he missed her more than anything. Shadow placed her head on his knee, a gesture so small but so powerful. Walter swallowed hard and gently laid a hand on her neck. Maybe I didn't get to save my boy, but maybe I was meant to save you. That afternoon, they went for a walk for the first time together. Shadow's limp was still present, but she moved with more strength now, her tail wagging faintly when Walter tossed a stick into the field. She didn't chase it, but her puppy did, bouncing after it with wobbly excitement. Walter laughed. It echoed through the trees, free and full for the first time in years. They made their way back to the house slowly, the three of them side by side. The cabin didn't feel so empty anymore. It felt like it had purpose again, like it was guarding something sacred. Shadow lay in the sun that evening while Walter sat on the porch steps, drinking sweet tea and watching the fireflies blink across the yard. The world was quiet, peaceful, until the mail truck arrived. It was unexpected. They hadn't seen the postman in nearly a week due to the storm, but there he was, young, polite, and quick. He waved as he dropped the mail in the box and drove off. Walter stood to check it. Most of it was junk, catalogs and an electric bill, but one envelope was different. No return address, just his name typed. He opened it carefully. Inside was a photo, Shadow and Officer David Renner standing in front of a military truck, both in gal uniform. A handwritten note on the back read, "If you're reading this, I didn't make it, but if she's still alive, please protect her. She's more than a dog. She's family." Walter stared at the message for a long time, his hands trembling. Shadow walked over and sat beside him, and he knew Renner hadn't just trained her. He had loved her, trusted her, and she had tried to protect him, even after death. "Don't worry," Walter whispered, slipping the photo into his shirt pocket. "You're safe now. No one's taking you away. Not ever again." But just as those words left his mouth, his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. He answered. A voice, cold and clipped, spoke on the other end. "You have one more day. Old man. Give us the dog, or we come for all of you." Walter hung up the phone with hands that no longer shook. The fear was gone now, replaced by something older, deeper, resolve. He looked down at Shadow, then at the pup sleeping with its tiny paw twitching in a dream. They weren't just dogs anymore. They were his responsibility. That night he didn't sleep. Neither did Shadow. She stood by the door, calm, focused, like she had done this before. When the SUV returned at dawn, Walter was waiting. He stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand, Shadow at his side. The same man from before got out. "You were warned," Walter said. He didn't flinch. And I said, "No." Another man moved toward them, but Shadow growled, a low rumble from deep in her chest. The man stopped. Then, from the woods, another vehicle appeared, Sheriff Lewis with two deputies, guns drawn. "This property is protected," Lewis said. "You have 10 seconds to leave." The men exchanged glances, then retreated. No fight, no words. Just silence as the SUVs reversed and disappeared for good. Walter exhaled. Shadow nuzzled his hand. Weeks passed. Shadow healed. The pup grew stronger. Walter filed for adoption, and with the help of Lewis and the letter from Officer Renner, it was approved. Shadow was no longer an asset. She was home. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Walter sat on the porch swing. The puppy curled beside him and Shadow resting at his feet. He looked at them and smiled. "I thought I was too old to start over," he whispered. "But I guess some stories begin when we least expect it. If this story touched your heart, remember, loyalty and love have no age, no uniform, no limit. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who still believes in second chances for dogs and for